in, but if everyone could drop where you're signing in from in the chat, that would be great. I would love to see where we have people come in. I see Tampa, Florida, Connecticut, Mexico. Okay, nice. Virginia, London. So we have a global audience today. So exciting. Vancouver. Yay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. First, I would like to say thank you to everyone that is joining today. We're really, really excited to have you be a part of this session. My name is Kashira Booker, and I am the Content Development and People Programs Director here at the Energy Project. And so I'm really, really excited about our discussion today. And yeah, to lead our conversation, we have our panelists. We have Dr. Thurman Webb and we have Melissa Wilson. Dr. Webb, he's an organizational psychologist. He's a licensed therapist, a professor, an executive coach, and a facilitator. And so we're definitely thankful to have him. Melissa, she is the lead consultant for Unified Consulting. She has more than 20 years of global experience spanning public relations, internal communications, and cross-group culture and change. And so we're definitely excited to have Melissa here as well. And we will go ahead and jump in. Before we get started into our discussion today, I would just like to give you a little bit of background information regarding the Energy Project, our organization, who we are and what we do. And so if you aren't familiar with the Energy Project, we are basically an organization that teaches individuals, leaders, and other organizations how to manage their energy in order to build resilience and to foster high performance. Many of our clients and a lot of the organizations that come to us, they're looking for ways to increase engagement, to increase the productivity and the performance and the overall capacity of their people. And so what we do is use a science-based approach to help them leverage that. We use a mixture of chemistry, we use psychology, human physiology, all those different factors that play into creating a productive and sustainable workforce. And so we believe that if you prioritize, the well-being of your people, and if you implement efficient energy management practices, it will really help them to be able to tap into their full potential and to show up at their best, right? And so that's how we can start adding more value as leaders, as individual contributors, as leaders, as parents, spouses, and so on. And so that is a little bit about the Energy Project and what it is that we do. And so, so I'll go ahead and get started. I'll jump in to today's topic, and our conversation is the first of a three-part series all about how to disrupt burnout. And so we know burnout is a global epidemic that's going on. Everybody experiences it in some way, shape, or form. And so today we're going to, one, identify and define what burnout is. And yes, we know it can manifest differently in everyone, but we would like to kind of condense it and give a definition or a general definition of what burnout is and what it looks like. We'll start discussing some of the triggers and the causes of burnout, some of the risk factors of burnout, and then finally, strategies that we can use to understand our personal triggers to help prevent us from getting to burnout. So I will jump right in with our first question. And Dr. Webb or Melissa, either one of you are free to jump in and answer this question. And so first, how would you define employee burnout and what are its key characteristics? I'll throw it to you, Melissa.
Certainly. So I feel as though, burnout is really when you get to a place of exhaustion and depletion. And it is really where you are struggling to perform, and you struggle to kind of get your mind into a place where you can muster what it takes to get to that next level. And I think, when you're in workplace environments, then it's challenging because a lot of organizations don't identify burnout as something that's real and tangible. And so that's where, on the individual level, it's tricky because you talk yourself into thinking you can't ask for help, and you may seem weak if you do, and it's not something that is acknowledged in the medical field or with your employers. And so you just kind of continue to spin and turn. And thankfully, that is not as true anymore. The World Health Organization is starting to call it a syndrome conceptualized by, chronic stress. And I think, through all of us here on this call being committed to understanding it more, both by employers leaning in and individuals leaning in, we can really increase that awareness and help make it something that is respected, and hopefully, one, cut it off at the pass, but two, also honor people that are experiencing it.
Thank you. Dr. Webb?
Yeah, so generally we characterize or we define burnout as some form of exhaustion. And it comes from, especially in the workplace, it comes from this constant feeling of being swamped. And when that happens, we become emotionally exhausted. We engage in some sort of depersonalization. And we generally have this feeling that, I don't know, maybe we are the only ones that are experiencing this. And so we engage in a lack of personal achievement. And like that really doesn't matter anymore. And it's primarily because your primary disposition is just trying to survive the moment. So it becomes very difficult to see past that. And the question is like, so what is actually happening when I'm in burnout, and how am I, not just what is the overall definition of it, but what is the definition of burnout for you in that moment? Because you may be feeling it physiologically at some times, and other times you may be feeling it in a more mental space. And so when we're in that case, like it may be bore out as opposed to burnout. Like I'm just not mentally engaged in this work. I've reduced it to something that is more monotonous and doesn't require a lot of strategic thinking. And when that happens, we very rarely we become stagnant. But in most cases, when you're in high performing jobs, you're not just stuck in one place. You actually start to lose ground, and you start to lose efficiency. And which means if I'm losing those two things, by no means am I actually performing. And those are the things that puts our professional disposition in jeopardy. And so burnout is a big deal. Why? Because like you said also, everybody at some point has either wrestled or worked to try to prevent it, or they've actually experienced it. But the thing is that in these high-paced, high-productive environments, we know that it is ever looming if we're not vigilant or taking care of ourselves. So, in a simplistic way, burnout is just some form of exhaustion that has jumped on us based on stress. And as we define stress here at the Energy Project, stress is when demand exceeds capacity. So when demand is exceeding capacity, then we have a tendency to enter into the space.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. And that actually is a great segue into our next question, because when we're experiencing these feelings of overwhelm and exhaustion, it can absolutely be stress, but we may characterize it as burnout, or it can be burnout and we may characterize it as just stress. So what would you say is the main thing that differentiates stress from being in a place or a state of burnout?
So stress is generally the conduit or the channel through which we head towards burnout. Generally, if you're somebody who's very heady, you're a thinker, burnout usually, or the stress usually comes by way of mining minor details, right? So if you're a thinker, you're thinking about details, it is this type of stress that will lead you towards burnout. If you're somebody who feels a lot, the stress usually comes by way of a mental strain, or this how I feel, or this hyper empathetic disposition that feels towards others at work and how they're experiencing it. And so that stress is leading you towards burnout because it's more than it should be. If you're a doer, a lot of times the stress comes by simple overload, like trying to maintain these rigid work schedules or these rigid work environments, and that stress is leading you towards this feeling of being burnt out, this need to be constantly producing. Now, over those three dispositions, I assure you that you could probably find yourself in one of them, right? Because we're always thinking, we're always trying to, in post-pandemic, we're thinking about how we feel when we're doing the work. And of course, the third one is like, I'm trying to be productive, right? And the job is asking me to be even more productive. And so it is generally mining around those dispositions that we experience large amounts of stress, and stress unmanaged leads to burnout.
Thank you. Melissa, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think just layering on to Dr. Webb is, just bullet listing it, excessive workload, lack of control or autonomy in what you're doing, inadequate support throughout your day, unexpected layoffs or business growth. In my field right now, I'm in tech, and with AI coming, it's like, hey, lean in or get out, like we're soaring, so we need you to perform. This is an opportunity, so it's your time. And so everyone's just like, okay, I have to do this, right? It's an expectation. So the next bullet is unrealistic expectations, right? Like this pressure to perform at peak levels or to be available 24/7, unempathetic bosses. And Dr. Webb touched on, the pandemic, and, COVID is still with us. And I think we still are very jarred from it. I got a chat from a colleague yesterday that someone can't speak next week because she has COVID. And it's, it's remnants and reverberating still. And I think it's easy for us to think we're past it, but we created a lot of new habits mentally, emotionally, physically during that time. And it's something that, we have to kind of retrain ourselves from. And going back to the way pre-COVID isn't necessarily the answer. We kind of have to create anew and get to know ourselves and our organizations, and proactively lead from right where we're at. So all of those things really can contribute to burnout. And Dr. Webb said earlier, again, it's like, how is it defined for you, right? And or your organization, and being really mindful about that, because nobody fits into the same box. So I would just share those pieces.
Thank you, Melissa. And so, yeah, so when in talking about burnout, and we defined it, there's a general definition for it, but we know that it also manifests differently in everyone. And one thing that may send one person into burnout may not necessarily be the same thing that sends someone else into burnout. So I want to kind of shift gears and start talking about the causes and the triggers of burnout. And we know that, there's a difference between causes and then there's triggers of burnout. So let's jump into the next question. What are some of the causes that you have observed in your experience of burnout? And can you share some, examples of triggers or, things that have potentially sent you into burnout?
Yeah, I'll say one of the ones that stands out is a lack of social support. A lot of times we think that social support, it can come from the work environment, but a lot of times it's a lack of social support outside of that. And generally that comes by way of people just not understanding what it is that we do. And so they don't know how to support us. And so when that stress comes and we don't have that support, then we don't really have a space of relief. The other thing is that It can be something interpersonal outside of work that I have not managed or remedy, and I'm actually taking that energy into work, and it is depleting my patience or my ability to process in an efficient way. And so when that happens, then the stress mounts, and then of course it leads to burnout. But again, it's generally those things, whatever it is that creates a relief for you. If you have not engaged in the self-care, I would say that is one of the root causes to your burnout. And so it may be taking the walk, it may be riding the bike, it may be hugging the tree. If you're not engaging in the things that care for you. I ask people all the time, like, how are you loving yourself? And are you taking care or loving others, loving yourself the same way you take care and love others? And a lot of times for people who are burnt, like, they're not doing that. They're doing for everybody else but themselves. And I need you to turn that action around and point it towards you. Why? Because you create and you maintain the space. That makes it more sustainable. And so anything that is supportive towards you from an internal or external standpoint, if you're not interacting, engaging in that, then that is probably a root cause for why you're heading or in burnout.
Yeah, that brings up a few for me. In my experiences, both personally and in managing others, there's kind of three that come up. One is in situations where there's really significant project deadlines and or recurring project deadlines with not a lot of give. Included in those are unclear roles and responsibilities, and creating conflict within colleague bases. So just that realm of realities. The second would be perfectionism, type A people, the competitive employee assessment realities within that, and how that mindset can really be detrimental at times when the workplace is extra stressful. Individuals with that mindset can kind of be at extra risk. And then I think the third is just that lack of coping strategy, right? Not taking the time to invest from a company and personal standpoint to know how to identify when burnout is coming, and then therefore know how to kind of catch yourself before it hits. So those are some things that I think commonly contribute to getting there.
And I want to point out this idea. You that brought up something when you said that, Melissa. Generally, when people perceive a lack of control or a lack of autonomy, it raises the probability of burnout too. And so while you may not feel like you have total control of the bigger picture, I usually challenge those individuals to analyze it and look for the spaces that you do have control. What do you have control over? And at the very least, you have some control over how it affects you. But generally, when we find places that create a high self-efficacy or improved autonomy around a situation, those are some of the small things we can do to start to combat this feeling of burnout. Thanks for jogging my memory, Melissa.
And that brings up a question for me. So in listening to you and give, some of the examples, causes, it's a lot of it stems from like external factors, so workload, deadlines, things like that. But could you speak to some of the ways in which we may cause burnout for ourselves, some of those internal factors, such as, I know for me, perfectionism and like wanting things to be perfect. And so I'm literally burning myself out trying to strive for something that may not necessarily exist. So yeah, could you speak to how, yes, there are external factors that lead to burnout, but there are also some internal factors that can help push us there?
Yeah, in the workplace, when we don't find meaning or purpose in it, or if it's not attached to meaning and purpose, then sometimes the job, we may not have meaning or purpose there, but the job helps us nurture the thing that is meaningful and purposeful to us. When we're not doing that, that raises the probability of burnout also. But the other thing is when there's a value mismatch in the workplace. Like we have a set of values and core values that we subscribe to, and that we generally try to guide or lead our lives with. When there's a mismatch between those two things, from my experience, individuals are at a higher risk of burnout there too. Why? Because they're expending a lot of energy managing their patience, managing their tolerance, and that is less energy they have to actually produce and create value in the workplace. And it takes a toll on you. And it generally takes more energy than individuals realize. Those are the two things that I would highlight from my experience. What about you, Melissa?
I wouldn't mirror that. I think those are really, really important. Purpose, just to emphasize that for me is really important. And I think a lot of workplaces also have, areas where there are causes and purposes within. And also, creating that narrative around how they allow you, whether it's through time offering or the financial gain that you get from your job, et cetera, to go and do even in the off times. I mean, I know it's really hard, again, for all of us to set boundaries and create that time and space, but it is about that self-care and giving to yourself and creating the space to nurture that purpose so that you have the balance. And it's just hyper critical to have that. So those are really, really important ones. I think you nailed them.
Thank you. And that purpose piece, yeah, I think that's really important, and it can be really transformational, because as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, in tasks or responsibilities in which I feel personally like indebted or connected to, even though it may be exhaustive, I feel good doing it. Like, if you're a marathon runner, or if you have children and you're doing something with them, even though it may be exhaustive, because the love or the passion that you have for whatever that specific task is, that the energy depletion doesn't feel emotionally so negative. You're emotionally full, even though, like, physically, for example, you may be drained. So that purpose piece is a big connector for me. So thank you guys for that. And so, yeah, so we talked about some of the causes, we talked about some of the triggers, we defined it. How can people start stepping into being able to identify, those triggers or those causes of burnout for them? Like, what are some strategies, or what is the key to being able to say, okay, you know what, these are the specific things that cause burnout in me?
Yeah, I would say that education and awareness is everything. I mean, showing up here today is amazing. I mean, clearly everyone here has either a professional purpose or a personal interest in learning more about it, me included. I think it's something that is super, super important. And I think there's two sides of the coin. One is self-awareness on an individual level to understand our own personal triggers and, participating in trainings, reading books, listening to podcasts, gathering tools so that, we can each be proactive, and developing practices around mindfulness and self-reflection, talking to colleagues who you trust, talking to loved ones who can sense when you're kind of over-indexing on work, so that you have, really trusted and positive accountability to speak openly about that. And if you're in a leadership position, or a managerial position, considering investing in education for your leadership or your teams, because one of the most valuable things that we did recently with our team at Microsoft, where I'm consulting currently, is got the leadership together and did a training. And the greatest takeaway of that was creating a common vernacular to even talk about energy and resources and how to guide the team, because then it didn't feel so individual and like everyone was on an island. And so let's say for a topic like burnout, the training wasn't on burnout, but it would allow them to say, hey, like, we all commonly understand this, and we can talk about it in a community way, and we can lean in and support our staff and our teams and not make it feel so taboo or have everyone, so unclear about what's okay. And that empathy will come in and that support will exist. And so, knowledge is king for organizations, and self-awareness is key for individuals.
Yeah, some of the things that are signs of burnout is if you become cynical at work, cynical or critical at work, if you are dragging in there every day and you're having a tough a tough time getting started, that could be a symptom of it. If you have become irritable and very impatient with your coworkers or around the work, or even your own process for how you produce, that can be a symptom of it. A lack of energy, period. And when it's really hard to concentrate, whether it be in the moment or for an entire day, I would say pay attention to that. So ultimately what I'm saying is pay attention to your gut. Your body is constantly trying to inform you about how it feels in certain moments. And the thing that I tell people all the time is that your body's always present. Even though if your head may not be, your body's always present. It is always recording and taking in information. I'll read through a few things, and if they resonate with you, then burnout may be something that you want to take a look at, or you may need to start taking the steps towards how you're going to prevent it. So if work or helping others is starting to feel endless, you might want to pay attention to that. If you feel like you're never acknowledged for all that you do, and that is becoming a part of your constant narrative, you may want to look at starting to do the things necessary to prevent burnout. If you feel like you have no time to actually relax, no time at all, you're constantly in a produce environment. If you're feeling exhausted and drained, if you're starting to wonder what drew you to this work in the first place, that's a good one, right? Like, why am I here? Like, this feels very meaningless. And then if you have no time to interact with the thing that is actually giving you energy or support or strength, I would say it's time for us to sit down and reevaluate. Remember, like Kashira mentioned earlier about this finding purpose and meaning into it. When we find meaning and purpose in the job, or it is attached to meaning and purpose, our job per se, we're allowing the work to give back to us. And it's important that when you are active doing the work, that you find some way for it to give back to you. We spend a lot of time at work. We spend a lot of time, especially when we're in high performance jobs, that it's not enough that it just serves someone else. You need to find a space where it serves you also. I need you to be a little selfish. And that is the purpose. That's one of the keystones to how we combat this feeling of prolonged stress that ultimately leads us to burnout.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat from AJ, and it reads, in terms of mitigating burnout, would you say it's a good idea to train either HR professionals or leaders in general to recognize signs of burnout? Is it overkill, and is there a risk of overanalyzing the signs?
I think we should take an active, it is not a cause and effect, all right? So one thing is not going to remedy this. There are just variables that contribute to the outcome. And yes, I think that is one that could contribute to a more functional outcome. Ultimately, when we talk about more sustainable models that combat burnout, it is generally a culture change. And culture changes happen when enough people of influence engage in behavior that is different from the norm. So yeah, it will take the HR department, it will take C-suite level executives, it will take mid-level managers to execute. It is a comprehensive approach to how we combat burnout within organizations. But let's not forget that you yourself are your own organization. And so you need to be making sure that you are running through the inventory of yourself to make sure that you're managing those things also. you are allowed to use your time wisely. And so it's not just about being efficient in producing for the place that you have agreed to do work at. Your first agreement was with yourself, and you have to make sure that you're in a position to produce for yourself, to create spaces that allow you to be. I want you to appreciate yourself. Appreciation does not require an end result. Recognition generally requires an end result or a product, and that's generally what we get at work. But I want you to just appreciate yourself for being, and sometimes you need to sit still. Find a place that is comfortable, that nurtures you, and do just that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, Dr. Webb. And I agree, AJ. I think, you know, going back to what I had shared last is, you know, knowledge is king for organizations. And to Dr. Webb's point, having HR and senior leadership and mid-level managers both having common knowledge and a vernacular to start the conversation to talk about it, they can then look at, you know, the company at large, the culture at large, and identify if it's a culture that is, you know, supporting, or if there are opportunities for change. Because the risk is, if it's a company that is, you know, perpetuating burnout, you're going to risk having your top performers be out for short-term disability, or worse, you know, they're going to resign. And so you're going to have this cycle that is going to challenge, you know, them taking all their learnings and you're going to have to start over with new people. And so it's a fantastic opportunity to kind of start that learning. And then obviously we all owe a responsibility to ourselves to honor who we are, and, you know, be our first advocates and find that the value in ourselves, and find a way to get some tools and resources so that we can avoid burnout first and foremost, and enjoy the work that we're doing.
Thank you, guys. And I would like to just add to that, specifically to the last two questions about, is it overkill or is there a risk in over analyzing the signs? I personally don't believe that there is a such thing as overkill with getting people to build that awareness, right? We said that awareness is key in being able to identify when you're burnt out. And we live, unfortunately, in a society that kind of pushes us to places of burnout where we're constantly on, we're constantly connected with technology, work, you know, that's just the way our society operates. And so I don't think there's a such thing as overkill, and I don't think we can overanalyze the signs. And the way that awareness steps into that is, you know, for you when you're getting to that point of burnout. And so though, you know, the emphasis may be there, like, you know, are you experiencing this? Sometimes some people can cope better than others in certain environments. So that's why you have to definitely be grounded and in touch with what's going on inside of you to be able to say, okay, this is my breaking point, or, you know, and that's their breaking point, et cetera. So yeah, I don't think that you can overkill or overanalyze the signs and symptoms of burnout. And thank you so much for that question, AJ.
Kashara, I would just say one additional thing on that. When saying overanalyze, I just encourage everyone to be cautious of that tipping point, because you brought in society, and society can be a really beautiful thing, and it can also be a tricky thing, because sometimes in overanalyzing, we bring in society's opinion, or their, you know, what we think society thinks is right or wrong, or, you know, how strong we should be, or those types of things. And Kashara, you hit on it, and Dr. Webb has been talking about a lot too. It's like, trust your instincts, know what your triggers are, know how you feel, and don't worry beyond that, because you know your truth. So analyze it to the extent that you need to, but be cautious that you're not worrying about the external, because that can sometimes make you think, especially us perfectionists, that, you know, we need to live up to something else, or we talk away the burnout and say like, no, I'm fine, and overanalyze it to the point that we can talk ourselves out of it. So I would just layer that on, because that can be a slippery slope sometimes.
Yeah,
Thank-
yeah, to complement that, a lot of times the overanalyzation uh creates an avalanche of feeling or information also. And generally when that happens, if we can't sift it all, then we cast it all away. And we ignore that the things that our body is trying to tell us, and like it becomes a daunting task to make meaning out of the information that we have encountered. So we're never able to declare that we have created new knowledge because we didn't take time to understand the information, and so we're stymied. And so, to complement Melissa's point, the key to this is like, how are you creating first the self-awareness? Like, and then like, how am I listening to me? How am I listening to my gut? You almost always speak to you in a gentle voice, which means you have to be very intentional about how you hear yourself. Think about it. There are times that you've been in situations and you told you this is not good or this is not working for me. But you got too heady about it and you use that to overshadow the wisdom and the information that was coming from the body. Remember, emotions, our EQ, are the wisdom of the body, and then thoughts and processes are generally the wisdom of the mind. They both have value. I'm going to challenge you to take that and put those two things together to create a more progressive and efficient way of managing self. Because we have to manage self in order to combat burnout. Because we can't always control the chaos, but we sure as hell can control ourselves within it. And I want to increase your autonomy and your self-efficacy through awareness to do just that.
Thank you, Dr. Webb. So we have another question in the chat. Do we have a sense on the role gender plays in the data on burnout? And at the risk of making assumptions on gender, curious if there's a higher percentage of people identifying as female that tend to engage in this conversation about burnout, and if so, what meaning should we make of this? And really quickly, before you guys jump in, I do have some statistics to answer you, Jeff. So yes, women are 32% at higher risk than experiencing burnout than men. But there are also other, identities and factors that play into your risk factors. And usually, so specifically for women who are mothers, they are 68%. Working moms, let me be clear, 68% more likely to be burned out. So yes, gender is a huge factor in the experience of burnout across people in organizations. And then Webb and Melissa, if any of you guys would like to jump in, feel free.
Yeah, I think one major component of that from a female perspective is multitasking. I think that is something that is an attribute that, females tend to exercise in greater capacity, which can be a benefit in some realities and can be a detriment in some realities. And so I think that is a contributor greatly to burnout in females and can be a challenge just from, taking on excessive amounts of things. Sometimes that's just mental, it's just, we believe we need to conquer the world and slay dragons extra every second of the day. And so that can be a big challenge. And again, why it's so important to understand ourselves and our capacity so that we can set some boundaries with ourselves and be self-aware in that. I will say, for the females on the call and the males who, may engage with those identifying as female who are, maybe going through burnout or sense are kind of on that cusp. There's a great book by Emily and Amelia Nogaski around, it's called Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And it is focused on, how women experience burnout different from men. And so it does have a great kind of a distinguisher to help, understand that a little bit more, just in kind of the differences of how our minds and emotions and things work. And at the same time, just the power of burnout is equally as strong, no matter who we are and what we're experiencing. So great question, and appreciate the stats, Kashara.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dr. Webb and Melissa, for, this discussion today. It definitely helps. It definitely helps with those of us that may be struggling with burnout, but it also, I think, can be a preventative measure, this conversation, for those who may not necessarily be in burnout, but now they are more aware and capable on how to prevent themselves from getting into burnout. And so we're going to open the floor shortly for, more questions if the participants have them, and you guys can jump off mute, etc. But really quickly, I would just like to give, a quick summary of everything we discussed. So first, we defined what burnout is, and our definition, it's a pervasive feeling of exhaustion or depletion accompanied by a sense of hopelessness, overwhelm, or despair that impedes on your performance, both professionally and or personally. But again, we know that the burnout is defined differently for everyone because it manifests differently for each of us. We talked about some of the causes and the triggers. It can be, chronic stress, excessive workload, lack of autonomy, lack of social support, lack of coping strategies, unrealistic expectations, more specific triggers, deadlines, unexpected layoffs, things like that. But overall, an imbalance in your life, work, situation. And then we talked about some of the strategies that, we can implement in combating burnout. And we talked about how awareness is key. And it's the first step in being able to recognize and address our personal burnout triggers and causes. And what that does, it allows us to develop and understand our own emotions first. We can understand our own emotions, thoughts, behaviors. We can identify what our personal limits are. And then once we have a hold on those and learn to manage those things, then we can better manage ourselves in disrupting our burnout cycles. And so awareness is definitely the foundation for it. And then being proactive and taking the steps in preventing burnout for yourself. We talked about how burnout can manifest in all dimensions, which I think they're definitely interrelated. And so, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, burnout can manifest. And though you may not be physically or emotionally burnt out, if you're mentally exhausted, that will definitely impede on your physical, emotional, and spiritual performance. So they're all interrelated in that way. And so, yes, thank you, Dr. Webb. Thank you, Melissa, both for being a part of this conversation. And now I will open up the floor to the participants to ask any questions. And I do see one just popped in the chat from Christy. And she says, after recognizing you're headed towards burnout, what is the best next first step?
Wow, great question. The first step is to accept what you recognize, right? I want you to accept that and then lean into it. Remember, this generally is a byproduct of prolonged stress. And so when we find ourselves in that position, the more immediate thing you need to do is remove yourself from the stress, which means get into a space that is nurturing you or that creates some sort of peace for you. Generally, when we encounter stress, we only have two options. We either lessen the demand or increase our capacity. And a lot of times in that moment, we don't have a strategy for how we're going to do that, especially when a lot of that is coming from what we call an externality, which means someone else or something else is casting a lot of that burden upon you. But I would say be gentle with yourself. You are a child of the universe. You matter. So I want you, Christy, I want you to get in the space and do something that specifically feeds you. And if others want to support you as you get into that space, absolutely do that as well. But I want it to be something that may not necessarily need them to do that. Now, sometimes we do get around individuals who truly care and love on us. And yes, that is support. That's when I'd make that phone call. Hey, I need to come over. We need to chill out. Why? I just need to decompress. Remember, we talk about it as the energy project. We operate on what's called an ultradian rhythm, which means like a lot of things, we can only do it for up to 90 minutes. After 90 minutes, we have to take a rest period. We have to engage in something that's for us so we can get back to doing the work in an efficient manner. But you also have to do that outside of work too. So I'd say interact with the thing that is nurturing you more often, whatever that may be. Make time and space for that. Work will find a way to fill up whatever time you allot to it. I need you to lessen the time you allot to it and then put yourself into that equation.
I love that. I would layer on to that, Christy, that, psychological conditions like depression and anxiety and panic disorders, they say that can affect one's ability to function at work. But burnout is a condition that stems from working too much. So, to Dr. Webb's point, it really is critical to take a step away, like trust yourself, know yourself. Work is always going to be there. Believe that you are worth it. Lean into those instincts and take a beat. You probably honor other people when they need to take a vacation, take time away. You lean in for them, trust that others will do the same for you. You are worth it. You deserve that. You don't have to sell people on that. That is not necessary. This is not something that is curable in taking one day off and taking a nap that afternoon. It's going to take some kind of, some restoration and some honoring of yourself and some self-care. So I really think, those are the important key things. And then really understanding what those triggers are and what those stressors are and how you can think differently about them, move through them. But the first thing really is just, this is from too much work. And so let's take a break. Let's connect with self and know that you deserve that.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? You guys can drop them in the chat or you can come off of mute and ask your questions.
As those questions come in, I just want to challenge people, make sure that you're working to reframe your perception. Reframing your perception can be a great tool in how you manage yourself and try to prevent burnout. There are multiple perspectives that converge on one moment or one interaction. And empathy says that I try to look through as many of those perspectives as possible. And when I do that, I generally find more options. When we're in survival mode, one of the key components of survival mode is we think that there's only one way to do something to get out of a situation or to get through a situation. But when we're in performance and we're thinking clearly in a more functional way, what happens is we see more options, not because more options are just present, but because we see more opportunities to create solutions for the thing that we're trying to work through. So I want to make sure that, I want to just make sure that I'm putting it out there. It's complement what Melissa says and what Kashir says, but reframing your perception allows you to get a handle on more of the issue. It increases your self-efficacy and it increases your autonomy, and it gives you more opportunity to take meaningful action. It's not just about doing something, like what you're doing, it has to matter, right? Because we want to move through this in an effective manner. And the way we do that is to analyze it through as many perspectives as possible.
Thank you, Dr. Webb.
Hi, my name is Audrey, and I actually have a question. And by the way, thank you all for speaking. I'm enjoying every single bit of it. But how are you able to maybe help a spouse? Maybe my spouse recently, I feel like just went through like a burnout period. How can you bring some of this information maybe up to a significant other? You feel like it's just being like going through like this burnout period, but maybe not being able to like fully register or understand that they're actually in this period of burnoutness.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll lean on my therapeutic background for this one. You really want to make sure that you validate what they're feeling. right? Because our feelings are real. The way we may define it may not necessarily be a fact, but the feeling behind it is real. And generally when we're dealing with that, especially with a partner, you want to just validate the feeling that they're having in that moment. I also want you to remember that the bulk of communication is nonverbal. And so while we really enjoy the verbal expressions when someone is clearly able to express it, especially with our partners, we do have a responsibility to understand the nonverbals and what those mean also. But when we also create a space knowing that nonverbal communication is a necessary part of interaction, then we also create a space for us to talk about what it is I need to be interpreting from your nonverbals, right? Because I don't want to make an assumption about something, but I do want to recognize that that is present. And then I want you to breathe, and I want you to encourage them to do the same. Just take a moment to just be and not worry about so much about becoming. I just want you to be in that moment and hug yourself and each other. Life is lifing. It is always lifing. But it is generally the moments that we able to slow down time and take a moment back in all actuality to just be. So I would encourage you, remember, information is power. And sometimes we provide information when individuals are not ready, but I would say just hold a space to continue to be a resource. I think some things come out of this discussion that we're having now that you're able to present, and just kind of read, when the opportunity affords itself to insert information that could be helpful. But validate, listen, be a resource. I think those things are a good start. Melissa?
Thank you so much.
Beautifully said. Yeah. I have nothing to share other than just, let him feel seen and cared for, and sharing resources, not in a pushy way, but just because you see him and you care and you feel that extension of that pain and frustration and exhaustion, and that you are a partner in that. And, we're exposed to information that you think could be helpful. And if there are other things that you can do, to serve as an extension and to uplift, and just to kind of open the communication, I think that's really important.
Thank you so much, guys. So it looks like we don't have any additional questions. Nope. No additional questions. So we can wrap up this discussion. Again, I want to thank Dr. Webb. I want to thank you, Melissa, for participating in this and sharing all of your thoughtful insights and advice and tips. We really, really appreciate it. And thank you to all of the participants for joining, for being a part of this conversation, for your questions. Definitely appreciate you all. And please be sure to sign up for the part 2 of this series. And this will be talking all about our responsibility in self-care and making space for ourselves daily, which we did discuss as part of being able to disrupt burnout. So I look forward to seeing you guys in our next session. If you have any additional questions or want to follow up, please go to our website, www.theenergyproject.com, and we have a contact us page where you can put your questions or, give us your contact information and we can reach out to you. But again, thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this. And I really, really appreciate you all.